Now let's try to create something that's a little more complex than our basic open hangar we did before. This is the Port of Portland Fire Department from my Portland International Airport scenery. And I thought it was a pretty good example because it's a fairly simple building, but when you get into modeling it, it's sort of deceptively complicated to create without the use of a couple of really handy methods that I've been using for a while now. So this is Google Earth, just a simple web browser. It's in full screen mode. Google Earth view of the airport. I use the control key to get it over into 3D mode. Fortunately, this airport is fully modeled in 3D. And while it's not the most amazingly detailed model, it does give you a pretty good idea about how the building is shaped. So here we are in Blender. As you can see, I've got a background image set up here for my building. I'll go over how to create these background images in a separate video. It's pretty straightforward though, it's not hard to do. We're going to start off by putting a cube down. Go into top orthographic mode here and let us create your basic cube. And I'm going to drag it up so that its reference point is right there on the ground. And then let's scale it up a bit. What I'm going for in this case, you've got a lot of different, let me go back over here. The challenge with this building is that while it's a fairly simple structure, there are these multiple levels of roof line. And not only that, but it's basically like two buildings sort of merged together. You got the main garage here for the fire apparatus, and then you've got the office building next to it. It's all going to be one mesh for us, but you can see it's got cutouts, it's got these little insets, and of course the roof levels change a couple of times. So that's our challenge in modeling this. I think to get started, I'm just going to make it, with the exception of these two little overhangs here, I'm going to make it my cube the overall height, or the overall depth, I guess, the overall y-axis of the building. And I'm going to scale it on the x-axis here to where it's the correct width. Kind of get it centered a bit. Alright, so that is sort of the max y and the max x for this building. Obviously this is way too tall, so I think I'm going to scale it on the Z, get it down closer to what it would be. It's not terribly tall. This is only about 3 meters, it looks like, on the short end. So now, one thing that I'll mention as we get started here, it can be hard when you're working in this mode to kind of see the details of your object. What you're seeing here is the textured view of the object when there's no material, no texture applied to it yet. It's just white, and there's no shading. You can't really see anything about it. One of the easiest ways to deal with that is to go over here to the Object tab, and down under Maximum Draw Type, I just switch it into Solid when I'm first modeling something. That means that no matter what your view is, you can using that method, you can see the background still, but the image itself doesn't have any textures, or the object doesn't have any textures applied to it yet. Really useful for modeling and sculpting and kind of dialing in your basic shapes. And the other method that I use, or the draw type I use a lot, is wire, because you can actually see through the object you're creating to the background image, and that helps you kind of see how to do all your cuts and adjustments and whatnot, and using the background as a guide. So anyway, going over to solid mode here. Where was I? I'm going to go into face mode and see. Let's apply our scale, and we'll see that this top face globally is 5.9. Gosh, let's put it down at 3 meters. See, that seems short to me. There is something odd about our scaling, because that does not look like 3 meters to me. Let's just put it back at 5 for now. We can change any of these things once we're done creating it. I'm just going to kind of give us a base to start with. Alright, and the next thing we want to do, I'm going to switch to wire mode, and I want to start cutting away the parts of the building that we're not going to need. So let me put down another cube here, scale it up really big, and what we're going to do is use a boolean operation to cut away these sides of the building that we don't need. So you can see here, the cube I'm going to use for cutting is quite a bit taller than the actual building. You want to overlap your building all the way around so you can make a good boolean cut with it. I'm going to duplicate this and drag it up on the Y. Put that right there. And I think before I get started too, I'm going to set the roof pitch on my building. So I'm going to go into edit mode and put down one edge loop here in the middle for where our roof crease is. And I'm going to grab that edge. Let me switch it into solid mode. Kind of drag that up to get a roof pitch that is more or less mimicking the pitch here. Grab these and bring them up a little. Not bad. Not bad. Close enough to get started. Alright. Now, here comes the first really cool, really magic little thing. Remember before when I had you set up your add-ons in Blender, and Bool Tool was one of them. The cool thing about that is, in order to cut things away from our main object using Booleans, all you have to do is select what you want to use for the cutter, and then shift right click the object itself that you want to cut, and hit Control minus, and it creates a Boolean operation to cut away that. I'll do the same thing with the other side. Control minus. For some reason that didn't work. Let's try it again. Probably just didn't have it selected right. Okay. Alright. So you can see, if we go back into top ortho and hit wire mode, that our building is starting to take the shape that it's going to need. Now there's also a couple of cuts here that I want to make, so I'm just going to duplicate this cutter that I used before, this cube. Scale it down on the X. Kind of get it where it needs to be. Making sure I'm in top ortho here. And I'm going to duplicate it again, kind of bring it out. Put it here so that I'll cut away this as well. Alright, let's see how that works. So I'll go over to our, make this solid, choose one cutter in the building, Control minus, second cutter in the building, Control minus. Alright, now we really are starting to take shape here. For these two pieces that stick out, I think I'm going to wait and just do those manually with a edge divide here in just a few minutes. I find that's a little easier to deal with in this case. And let's see, what else do we need to do before? Well, not much really. Tell you what, let's take our main building here, go into the modifier stack and apply all these Boolean cuts. By the way, let me back up. One of the really cool things about using Bool Tool to do this is you can see interactively in real time, you can actually alter your cuts. So you can do a lot of really fine sculpting with these in real time. That's pretty cool. Very handy. Anyway, once you're done making all your cuts and you're pretty satisfied, you won't need to move anything. Just apply all these, and now these are baked into the model itself. You can see it's actually got faces where we've cut things away. Now I'm going to use I'm going to invert my selection here and get rid of my cutters. I don't need them anymore. The next thing we want to do is start making our cuts to the roof so that we can basically create this two-level roof that's going on here. So the first thing I want to do is join these two vertices. Well, that didn't work so well. I'll tell you what let's do. Let's do a cut. Just use the cut tool, K, hit C to constrain it, and we will just cut between those two verts. And you can see it snaps to the vertices when you get there. That's more like it. I just wanted to cut across the roof at the exact spot where these two areas, sort of where the two buildings meet. And I also need to, actually, I should have done this before I did my booleans. I also need a couple of cuts. I need cuts here and here so that we can raise the level of the roof. But I'll tell you what, let me go ahead and I'm going to do another cut constraint here. Alright. So basically what we need to do now is cut this and this, these two horizontal edges, so that we can raise that area. Let's do another cut constraint. Cut it right about here. Enter. And do that down here as well. Boom. Just like that. And let's go into solid mode. Now what we need to do is select the faces that we're going to actually raise up and extrude them. Find sometimes it's easier to see what you're doing in perspective mode than ortho. What I'm doing is creating this raised area here. That doesn't look too bad right there. I kind of like the shape of that. All right. So we're good there, and then we're going to create these two little areas that sort of poke out here by go back into ortho mode. Really easy to make cuts that way. Hit our cut constraint again. Boom there, and then I'm just going to go into edge mode and subdivide twice here. And I'm going to edge slide this where it goes right where it needs to be. You can also double tap the G key to slide it. And then select our two faces, top ortho, and we're going to extrude them out. Just like that. And the only thing we need to do is make sure they carry through the roof pitch. So let's go to our side view here, our right ortho. We'll grab those two edges and just kind of bring them down so that we have one consistent roof pitch here. I'm just eyeballing this. Close enough. And there you go. The only other thing that I might want to do, there are a couple of things that aren't apparent at first glance, but if you look a little closer, there are end caps on these buildings that have a raised roof line. You can kind of see there it's in red as opposed to this teal roofing, and happens on both ends. There's actually an inset area that pokes out on the end here. Looks like maybe these two caps are the same size, or roughly the same size. So I'm going to create that as well. I think what I'll do is subdivide my edges here for the roof, and then edge slide that over pretty good bit. Just to kind of give my end cap there. Before I do that down here, I'm going to do a couple of cuts with constraint. No need to be hyper accurate. We're going to use the side view in just a second. Let's go into our right orthographic, choose this, edge slide, and just slide it down to where it is about equal with the part that sticks up there. There. It's more like it. We're going to choose these two faces and just extrude them out a hair. About the same amount as we did here. Alright. And then we're going to choose both these and extrude them up a hair. That may be a bit exaggerated, but it will help you kind of get the idea. So we've got this little area that sticks out here. I'm not going to worry about this little whatever this addition is here. just for now. Let's just concentrate on the main building. Alright. Not too bad. So from there, I think probably our next move is going to need to be to go ahead and unwrap the building. We're going to mark all our seams and get it unwrapped. So we'll cover that next. Actually, before we get started with our UV unwrapping and our seam marking, it might be best to go through the object here and have a look at our faces. One of the things that I've found just in general when doing unwraps is that N-gons don't tend to be very friendly for UV unwrapping. So for instance, some of these faces, like this one or this one or this one, are quads. They just have 4 vertices and they should unwrap no problem at all. However, faces like this, which has, gosh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 vertices, this kind of N-gon can create some real problems and often can be distorted and just generally a pain when you're trying to unwrap things. So we want to create or get rid of as many of these N-gons as possible. I'm going to just select these 2 verts and join them. Might select these 2 as well and join them. Now we've got a quad, a triangle, another quad. Those will all be fine. By the way, if you've watched a lot of videos about object creation in Blender, the general consensus is that quads are sort of the one and only, the god of modeling, and that you shouldn't ever do anything but quad-based topology. And it's good advice in general. However, for the kind of simple objects that we create for flight sim scenery, and especially in cases like, say, this roof, where they're all coplanar, these faces they're all flat, there is absolutely no harm in having a triangle in your geometry. It's not a bad thing. It's not to be avoided. It's certainly nothing to stress over. So if you have triangles in your geometry, and a lot of times they're not really avoidable, like for here, I've got these areas of the roof. The easiest thing to deal with, well, I could do this. I could select these 2 and join them. Well, no, see, we still have an N-gon there. So I'm going to not worry about having triangles in there. I'm just going to keep joining things up so that everything is a quad or a tri. It takes a few minutes to just kind of go around the geometry, get used to looking at things this way, you know, and understanding the difference between geometry that's going to be easy to unwrap and geometry that won't. Let's see. Those are both quads, so I'm just going to join those 2. Triangle, and maybe I'll do that as well. Make that a tri. Maybe do that as well. Another N-gon here. By joining that, we keep that from being a problem. Join this one. Any other N-gons here? Just in looking through it, I don't immediately see any. Well, we're going to try to unwrap this and see how it goes. We'll find out quickly enough if we have any N-gons or any issues with the unwrap. Next thing we need to do is create some edges here. You don't strictly have to create to mark seams in your model in order to do a good unwrap, but it makes it a lot faster. And if you kind of get used to thinking about seam marking and how to split a model up so that you can unwrap it easily, it's a really good mental exercise. It's a good thing to get to know. And it definitely, like I said, it speeds things up a lot. So we know we're going to want our roofs, for instance, to be a separate UV map or UV shell. So I'm going to go around my roof edge here. Mark seam. Same thing for this roof edge. Mark that seam. Got that pretty well taken care of. And then now it gets kind of down to walls. I want to look around the model and see kind of think about how I'm going to want to texture it. What's going to make it really easy to lay down textures for. I'm assuming with this model and for these early stage videos that we're going to be texturing stuff by hand and not using a program like Substance Painter. So we want to keep that in mind. Think about what's going to be logical, what's going to be easy to understand when you're creating your texture sheets. So for instance, I know this building it's masonry. I think it might have like a stucco finish on the side of it. We're probably going to want them to, it'd be easiest if these walls that wrap, like the garage walls, the front, the side, and the back here, were kind of all one shell. So I'm going to mark a seam where the garage starts there. See, I'm going to have to mark this, which is the edge of the roof. This sort of outcropping here. And then mark the other edge where it's going to end. So that's going to be one contiguous piece that we're going to be able to texture. It'll make it a lot easier now. It'll become obvious here in a minute why we're doing it this way. Then the office building, this wall just kind of wraps around. I don't see any issues. I think I'm going to put a seam here though. And then I'm going to do this part that sticks out separately. And the back sides need to be handled separately as well. So the back side of our outcroppings here. Okay, it's got that handled fairly well. This piece, that's sort of the little lip where the roof is raised, that's going to be a separate shell as well. The other thing that we need to remember to do is to get rid of our bottom facing faces. We're not going to need those. They're not going to show in the sim, and they're just wasted geometry. So get rid of any face that points down toward the ground, whose normal points at the ground. Okay. Once again, before you ever hit unwrap, always apply the scale to a model. Otherwise, it's just going to not unwrap correctly. And I'm going to pull a new window over here, change it to our UV image editor. I've set up a new a background image, or a sort of a working texture sheet here for the object that is a UV color grid. They're really handy to use. They're kind of like a UV grid in that they help you make sure that all the faces and on your model are going to be scaled properly on the texture sheet. You don't have anything really out of whack or out of scale. But they also show you which way your faces which way the faces point. Like, make sure that things are up and down and not sideways and that sort of thing. I know I'm rambling. It'll make sense in a second. And to do this, I just basically went down here in the UV image editor, chose the plus sign to create a new texture. I think I gave it a 2048 for my size. And then for the generated type, chose color grid. And that's how I wound up with this. What we're going to do is we're going to basically apply this to our model. Switch it over here in the object tab to textured for our draw type, and you can see it hasn't been unwrapped yet, so it's pretty psychedelic. And now that we've got all our seams created and our scale applied, we're going to hit U and unwrap and see where we go. And already you can see it actually did a pretty good job on the unwrap. I don't see any stretching. I don't see any distortion. This is good. Karma is with us. Sometimes you get a little bit of that and you have to go back and manually unwrap a few things, but I think we've done good here. So you've got your basic faces here. Well, there is one bit of distortion. Look, you're right here. Here's a good example. I'm glad it happened this way. So got some distortion here. Why is that? Let's go back and look at this in solid mode for a minute. See if we can suss out why it's distorted. Well, it could be because we have n-gons here. See these faces, these two faces are n-gons. We didn't join these vertices. So let's try that. Let's convert these to tries here and see, going back to textures, see if it makes a difference. Yep, and sure enough seemed to make a difference. So there you go. I'm glad that happened. It's a good teachable moment. Yeah, your model will always give away when you've got n-gons because they won't unwrap properly and you'll get that kind of stretching and distortion. And then over here, let me just pull this over a little wider. You can see our unwrapped version of the building. Now this is not packed or anything right now. We obviously want to pack it to get more efficient layout going, but it's a good start. I think the thing to do next, first of all, we're going to go down there's a channel selector on the image that you have on screen here. This is the left one here, the one that's sort of a triangle shape with a checkerboard, is the image and the alpha channel. We don't have any alpha channel here, so nothing to worry about. This is just the RGB, and this mode here, which is just the alpha, in this case super handy because you can switch it to that mode and you can actually see your UV shells better, be able to move things around a little bit. We can just use the G key now to move them around on screen. Not H, G. No, stop it. I do that all the time. I hit the H key to hide it instead of G to grab it. So I want to kind of scale things so that they'll fit nicely on here. And then I'm just going to kind of start thinking about what the most efficient layout is for this. These are our two roof sections. Put them aside for a minute. These are the portion. These are our office walls. And when I'm laying these out, I want to make sure and keep things lined up well, especially up and down on that y-axis, because it'll just make texturing that much easier. You see, this is one of our roof interiors, or the little roof areas that sticks up, and it is upside down. We just move it around a little bit. We can see which one it is. See, it's this one here. You can see it moving when I move it. We just want to rotate that 180. Well, I just kind of pack things in tightly to make sure that everything will fit well. Roof tops, little tops of the areas that stick up. And looking at this, it becomes obvious fairly quickly that if we wanted to use one texture sheet for this building, and we wanted to lay it out kind of like this, there's a lot of wasted space on here. And we could do one of two things. You can either not scale things the same. You could scale up the areas that are smaller, you know, the office sides, the edges of the building and all that. Or we could break it up differently, break our shells up differently and move them around so that we have more room to play with. Like right now, everything is this size because this is the defining, the areas of the garage, the walls of the garage are the widest element of this. If we could break this up, if say we split it up so that, go back into face mode here, so that this part of the garage was separate, we just choose it on our 3D view and then grab it over here and move it and hit all. Now by separating that out, we can kind of do a little better job laying things out here. Put that down. Now we can put those side by side. Maybe move this up here. Although I kind of want to keep my ground level the same for both of those. And you can see pretty quickly how we're going to wind up with something much narrower now on our texture sheet, and we will thus be able to scale things up quite a bit and give ourselves much better resolution, much better use of that texture sheet now. You can auto pack these things. I find it doesn't yield very useful results when you do it in Blender using that Control P. Because it tends to rotate things that you don't want rotated and pack things in odd ways, and if you're trying to texture by hand, it can make it a little difficult to deal with. The other thing that I take sort of as a guiding rule is that roofs in general don't have to be the same resolution as the rest of the building. I generally make them a little bit lower res. A lot of times they take up more room on the texture sheet anyway, so if you make them smaller like that and basically decrease the resolution, you can get away with packing more on the same sheet. I'm gonna scale these up now, kind of set them in there and scale them to where I get a better fit while still being able to put everything on the sheet. Not too bad. And then what we do, since we know we have this much texture sheet left over, is we can bring our roofs up here and basically see how much resolution we can get out of them. We can probably go more or less full res with them. Try to pack them in a little more tightly. Not bad. And you can see in the end, if you just compare the sizes of the grids on the side of the building and the top, that the way it worked out, the roof is really not much lower resolution than the sides are. The squares are a little larger, but that's not going to be enough to be very noticeable once we create the final texture sheet. So that's got us more or less UV mapped where we need to be. So there's one more thing we want to do before finishing up this video, and that is to make the cutouts for the garage doors. You'll notice if we go over to Google Earth here that the building has quite a few roll-up doors both in the front and the back. The complexity of this is going to be compounded just a little bit by the fact that the doors are different sizes. There are different numbers of them. On the front of the building here, it appears that the doors are mostly the same size. I'm going to say these are all the same width. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them on the front. On the back, it's a bit of a different story. There are 3 wide doors. Several of them are open here, so it's a little hard to see them, but there are 3 wide doors that are the same width as the ones in the front, it looks like. And then there are 6 narrow doors. 6 narrow doors are along this area of asphalt here. The 3 wide doors correspond to this concrete pad that sticks out. And we're going to want to cut these into the building so that we can inset them a little bit using an extrude and give that a little 3D dimensionality. We don't necessarily extrude for all the windows and all the small, like human-sized doors, but I find that the ones that are inset a little more radically, like the big roll-up doors in buildings, a lot of times it's good to go ahead and make those as cut those into the model and do a little bit of extruding to get some shape to them. So anyway, the first thing we need to do is figure out how wide the doors need to be. Now what I'm doing in this case is using a technique called knife project that allows you to cut into an existing mesh using a shape that's sort of projected onto it and cuts the mesh. And here, I'll demonstrate how it works. So I'm just going to click on the face of the building here and hit Control A to add a plane. I'm in object mode, by the way, obviously. I am going to scale -90. What am I saying? No, I'm going to rotate on the X -90. And I am going to scale that door up a bit. This is going to be the shape that I'm using to create my door. And let's scale it up a hair. I'm going to grab an edge here and kind of move it up. One thing to bear in mind is that we don't want to create more extra geometry unless we absolutely have to. Let me switch back into solid mode on my main building here. Go to the back view ortho. We want our doors to correspond to the door tops to correspond to this line that already exists here, this edge. So that we don't make like a tiny little polygon here. The challenge, of course, is that once you've gone into object mode or into edit mode on our door cutouts here, you can't see where that edge is anymore on the main building. So what you want to do is right click on the main building to select it, and then in the same panel here, the object panel, for what we want to display, we're going to click wire and we're going to choose draw all edges, so that even when the object isn't selected, you can still see the edge that we're trying to match up to here. So I'm just going to grab my door cutout, kind of drag it down, just stick it right along the top of that. Doesn't matter about it overhanging the bottom. It's not really an issue. I'll show you why in a second here. And then we want to get the sizing about right on the doors. Now you'll notice on Google Earth here, if we go around to the back, these 3 doors, they have a fairly wide space between them, and they're centered right over where this concrete pad sticks out. So that kind of gives us a guide to how wide they need to be on our model. We know that if we have 3 of these doors, we're just going to put an array modifier on them here. If we have 3 of these doors, they need to fit right over the concrete pad. So 3 of them, adjusting the distance between them. Just going back and forth. That's not bad. Not bad. I feel like maybe it's a little close to the edge. And I'm going to select the edge of my main door here and kind of bring it in a little bit. And then adjust the array. Yeah, that feels a bit more like the right spacing between them. Okay, those aren't bad. I'm going to duplicate them and bring them around to the front of the building here. Rotate them. And stick them about where they need to be. The front doors are a little different in their spacing in that the 6 that are on the right here are all spaced equidistant and with these really narrow pillars between them. The last door on the left is actually got a much wider space between it. So I think what I'll do is I'll make the 6 that are evenly spaced and put them in. And then I'll do that last one separately. Decrease the spacing a bit between them. What we want to bear in mind is that there needs to be room for a human-sized door to the right of them all, which is, you can't really see it very well, but it's right here. And that's not bad. I like that. And then what we'll do is duplicate that. I'm going to drag it over here and get rid of the array on it, so it's just a single object, and kind of get it in position as well. Yeah, that's about right. More distance, smaller distance. I'm going to apply the array to these doors and then join them. And then we're going to do the back doors here. I'll do the narrower doors. First, I'm going to duplicate them. There are 6 of them. Scale them on the X to kind of bring them into line. Again, very small pillars, very small distance between them, but a larger one at the end here. And about the same amount of space between this one and this one as there is between this one and this one, so that's looking good. We're going to apply the array, actually apply the array to that one too, and then join them. Alright, now we have our doors shaped and our cutouts kind of created. Now we need to turn them into just edges and make them curves in order to use knife project. So I'm going to just go into edit mode, hit Control A for, or hit A for all, X, and delete only the faces. And then in object mode, use Alt C to convert it to a curve. Do the same thing for these front ones here. Now you got 2 sets of curves. And then in order to do the knife project, to make the cutout of the door in the front of our mesh here, we're going to select the door curves on the front, then shift right click our building to select it, and hit tab to go into edit mode. I'm going to go into the front orthographic mode. This is important because it's going to project exactly the way you see it on screen. It's going to cut the way you see it. If you were to look at it like this, it would make the cut sort of this way. It's going to cut straight in no matter what your view is. So you want your view to be square straight on to your building. And then in your tools menu here, under the tools tab, go down to add and choose knife project. And what that's done is cut these faces into the front of our building. Here, it'll be a little easier to see if I turn off the draw all edges in the wire now. Hide everything but our building, and you can see. And I see. I thought I called myself doing this just right, but it turns out that my shapes were just a little bit taller than this edge on the front of the building, and it's still made these silly little polygons. So let's go back and fix that. I'm gonna hit Control Z till we get past that point. Okay, here we go. So let's go into front mode here, orthographic. Let's grab our front doors and just grab them on the Z excuse me, grab Z and move them down so that these are properly aligned. Curiously, these aren't. The back doors need to be pulled up just a hair. Alright. Alright, that should work a bit better now. Grab our front doors, shift right click our building, edit mode, knife project. Yeah, that's more like it. Let's do the same thing with the back. Object mode, select our door cutouts, shift right click our building. Let's go into orthographic mode, knife project, and now we have our cutouts. And when you're done doing all the cutting and you're in object mode, you can actually get rid of the cutting curves for that. And now you can see it's made the extra faces for the doors in our building. And if we go back over to this is why I did this, by the way, when I did, rather than initially before the UV unwrapping. It's easy to unwrap a single face, and doing these knife projects doesn't affect our UV unwrap. So if we were to go back to our textured mode, you can see everything is still intact and looking good, except that now we have individual faces that we can extrude for our doors. So I'm going to select all the doors on the front here. I'm going to hit extrude, kind of bring them back a bit. Yep. And in solid mode, I am going to select all the these little upward facing faces that got created and delete those. We don't need them. We're not modeling the ground. Oops, I had only faces. Delete faces. There we go. More like it. Let's go on to the back and do the same thing to these doors. Make sure you have your door faces selected and not the area between them. Extrude, kind of bring them back in. And then go through and just select and delete the door bottoms. Alright. Now, one thing that we have done by doing the extrude, we have actually smeared, we've created new faces without UV unwrapping them. So we'll see that on the edges here, it's difficult with a, if you get really close, you can see basically all these little, come on baby, all these faces that we extruded here, those will need to be UV unwrapped, but everything else is already unwrapped properly. So the easiest way to deal with that is to select each of our door faces here, just do it in solid mode, each of our door faces, and then using Control plus, numpad plus that is, you can expand your selection and then just deselect the doors, and that'll leave you with just the door frames. Hit U unwrap. Oh, look at that. See? It complained up at the top about it having a non-uniform scale. So let's do our applied and scale again. And then U unwrap. And we will go over here and open up our UV image editor. Just pull these off to one side for now. These are the door frames. Do the same thing on the back. We're just going to select our door frames. Numpad plus. Shift select those faces. U unwrap. Alright. Alright, now we've gotten all those done. Let's hit A. The other thing we want to do, because right now the way the object is mapped, the door itself and the surrounding wall, you can kind of see it here if I switch my mode. That's the surrounding wall, and that's the door in the middle. And they are, of course, perfectly aligned because all we did was make a cut and do an extrude. And that's going to be difficult to texture because that means that there's literally no padding at all. There's no gap between your door texture, which is in one place, and the wall in front of it, which is in another and separated by this door frame. And that's going to be difficult to work with. So what I generally do in that case, slight bending of the keeping everything at the same scale rule, is I select the door faces, and then I just scale them down just a little bit to create a gap. And then you can just kind of grab each one of them and probably need to be a little more than that. Just want to create a little gap, a little padding between the door frame and the front of the building. There we go. And then just kind of put it in position here. Still trying to keep all the door frames, you know, aligned with one another on the X and Y, or on the Y rather. Okay. Just kind of fit them into their door frames a bit, but with a little padding around the edges. And that way we don't have to be pixel perfect with our texturing in order to make it look right on the model. I'm not doing any fast forwarding. I'm just kind of showing you all the painful steps involved to get something like this done in real time. This is quite literally how long it would take me to do this, and every step I would go through if I were working on an actual project. It probably goes a long way to explaining why I don't get more done than I do. But, you know, that's life. That's life as a scenery developer. Okay. Then the last thing we need to do is take our door frames and get them into the scene. They're obviously a lot larger, scaled a bit differently than our doors. I'm going to rotate them 90 degrees so we get them in the right orientation. And then to kind of eyeball the scale and the size, I am just going to get them close to one another. Selecting just the door frames, and I'm kind of bringing them down. Now what we have is the area in the middle here. You get three faces. You got the side, the top of the frame, and the other side. And the tops of the frame should be roughly the same width as they are here. So, for instance, these are our 6 narrow doors. So let's move them over here in front of one of the narrow doors and just scale them down, 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 to where they're approximately the right width. Actually, are they? No, these are the 6 narrow doors up here. I'm sorry. So, just want this face to be about that width of that. All right, good enough. Fortunately, there was a nice spot here at the top of our texture sheet, so I'm just going to take just give them a little extra padding. I could have done that when I unwrapped them probably and been a little faster about it. You can dial in padding when you do your unwrapping, but this won't take but a second. And then it'll be done, and we'll be ready to slap textures on them. giving a little room in between each door frame. You don't necessarily have to do each door frame separately. You know, you could map them all to one texture. The one difference, or the one thing that would be impacted by that, though, is if you want to bake the ambient occlusion, which I recommend on a building like this. You don't want to have any overlapping UVs. You want every face to be mapped to a unique space on your texture sheet. Alright, there you have it. We're all mapped up, and we are ready to apply textures. So that is that, as they say, is how you do that.